Riverside is an old but breathtakingly beautiful park. The aged maple canopies stand as silent witnesses of time, still rustling in the wind despite having weathered countless seasons of falling leaves. In autumn, the stone-paved path blanketed in golden leaves makes one feel as though stepping into a living painting, a place where time seems to slow. Every Sunday morning, without needing an alarm clock, the neighborhood residents know Mr. Harold has arrived again. He isn't particularly striking, an elderly man with silver hair, a worn sweater, a felt hat with frayed edges, and a tall, lean frame that remains unbent by age. What makes him memorable is the sight of him sitting quietly on the old stone bench by the lake, his left hand holding a cup of black coffee, his right placing a bouquet of white chrysanthemums on the seat beside him. He sits there for nearly an hour. No newspaper, no music, just sitting, gazing at the lake, watching the wind whisper through the trees. Occasionally he smiles faintly, as if listening to someone speaking. People speculate about him. He must be a war veteran. No, I heard he's a retired professor. His wife passed long ago, so now he's lonely. Maybe he's ill. Alzheimer's? Lost in memories, unaware of the present. But Mr. Harold never confirms. He only greets people softly, nods at acquaintances, and leaves quietly when the clock strikes 9 a.m. Emily is a young writer who moved to this town a few months ago. She's in a severe, creative block. After her first 2 novels sold only a few hundred copies, her publisher suggested she take a break to rediscover real inspiration. She took it as a polite dismissal. Exhausted, she moved in with her aunt in Ohio, hoping to escape the chaos of city life. Every morning, Emily brings her laptop to Riverside Park to write, hoping nature and quiet will unlock her mind. But what catches her attention isn't the scenery, it's Mr. Harold. After weeks of observation, her curiosity becomes unbearable. Someone who comes to the same spot at the same time with the same bouquet, there must be a reason, right? One Sunday morning, gathering her courage, Emily approaches the stone bench where Mr. Harold sits. She smiles politely. "Hello. I hope you don't mind. I've noticed you come here every week. I'm a writer. I like observing interesting things. And you are truly fascinating." Mr. Harold turns. His pale blue-gray eyes, like a winter sky, hold unexpected warmth. "Calling me fascinating, is that a compliment or an insult?" he asks, his voice low and amused. Emily laughs. The first time in weeks. "A compliment. Definitely a compliment." He gestures to the bench. "Then sit. But you'll have to take responsibility for what you're about to hear. It might not be as interesting as you think." Emily opens her laptop but doesn't type. She closes it and sits down. Mr. Harold gazes at the lake. The wind rustles the trees. After a long silence, he says, "This bench was where my wife and I sat for 40 years. Every Sunday. Right here." Emily is stunned. Her name was Margaret. We met here. It was 1973. She asked to borrow my pen. We talked, then agreed to meet the next Sunday. And the next. Until it became a habit, a life, a marriage. His voice softens, as if the wind has carried away part of the memory. We still came here every week. Even after our children grew up and left. We grew old on this bench. Emily doesn't know what to say. She nods, eyes glistening. She passed 5 years ago. Cancer. 6 months from diagnosis to the end. Quick as a winter gust. He pauses, tightening his grip on the chrysanthemums. "I keep coming here, every week. Not because I can't move on. But because I want to tell her about this week. About our kids. The neighbors. The world. Like she used to tell me every Sunday morning." A leaf drifts down, landing near his shoe. Emily knows. She's just heard the most extraordinary story of her writing life. From that first conversation, Emily returns to Riverside Park every Sunday. No longer aimlessly seeking inspiration, but to listen. Mr. Harold, after weeks of sparse storytelling, begins to open up. Each week he shares a fragment about Margaret, his wife, and the life they shared. Margaret was a terrible cook, but she loved hosting dinners. "I once ate steak so charred I thought it was coal. Yet friends kept coming back. Probably because her laughter drowned out the burnt smell. Another time, when she was pregnant with our first, she wrote me daily letters about her feelings. Even though we lived together, she'd slip them under my pillow. One night, I came home late and found a note. The baby's kicking hard. Bet they'll be a karate master. Emily takes notes, laughing and crying. She's no longer just an observer. She's become part of their 40-year love story. And she starts writing. Not fiction like before, but fragments of memory, Mr. Harold's words, retold in the language of the heart. She titles the manuscript, Sunday Appointments, Tales from the Stone Bench at Riverside. One day, Emily asks, "If you could see Margaret again, just for a minute, what would you say?" Mr. Harold is silent for a long time. Then he whispers, "I'd say, I still come here, like we promised. And you know what? I still save your seat every week." Emily chokes up, turning away so he won't see her tears. One October evening, while editing Chapter 3, Emily gets a call from an unknown number. "Emily Carter?" "Yes. I'm a nurse at St. Mary's. We're caring for Mr. Harold Owens. He asked us to call you before his phone is turned off." Emily rushes to the hospital, her mind racing. Why me? How serious is it? Where's his family? She finds him frail and 4 in his arm. "Emmy, you came?" he murmurs weakly. "What happened? Why didn't anyone call your son? Or family?" "I live alone. My kids are so scattered. Busy. I don't blame them. I just wanted to say goodbye properly if this is it." Emily squeezes his hand. "You're not going anywhere. You still have to tell me about Margaret spilling soup on the cat." He chuckles. "You remember that? You really are a writer." 2 days later, he stabilizes, a severe blood pressure drop, but no stroke. During his recovery, he calls Emily over. "I have a gift for you," he says, handing her an old wooden box. "What's this?" "Letters Margaret wrote during her first pregnancy. You once asked what made me love her most. Here's your answer." Inside are over 100 yellowed letters, some still scented with perfume. Emily reads one. "Day 42, you overslept today and missed breakfast. I put ginger cookies in your bag, good for your stomach. I love you. And so does our baby." Tears fall. "Use them if you'd like. For the book," he says. "Are you sure? These are so private. You're part of these memories now. And Margaret wouldn't mind." Emily works tirelessly, editing late into the night. She's no longer writing for readers, but for hearts that have loved, lost, and longed. Above all, she writes to preserve a love untouched by time. One Thursday morning, after months of revisions, Emily submits the final manuscript. Sunday Appointments, a love story from the stone bench at Riverside. No embellishments. No melodrama. Just raw memories, each sentence soaking into readers like warm tea on a winter night, soothing their losses. Unexpectedly, the book becomes a phenomenon. It hits the New York Times bestseller list in its first week. Blogs, radio shows, and morning TV feature it, not because Emily is famous, but because people see themselves in Harold and Margaret's story. A widow cries, remembering her husband lost a decade ago. A single father thanks Emily for reminding me why I loved their mother. A retired nurse writes, "I thought we elders were forgotten. This book made me feel seen." Then the unimaginable happens. Emily's publisher invites her and Mr. Harold to a New York Awards ceremony for best-selling authors. They plan reprints and translations into 12 languages. The next morning, Emily rushes to Mr. Harold's house. But his neighbor stands at the gate, tearful. "You passed last night." Numb, Emily is handed a letter. "For Emily, keeper of my memories." It reads, "Dear Emily, if you're reading this, I've gone. It's all right. I've lived long, loved deep, and told all I needed to. You were life's final gift to me, ensuring our story isn't forgotten. Don't grieve. Go to New York, stand tall. If anyone asks about the old man in the book, say, I was the only one who heard him to the very end. Oh, and if you could, place white chrysanthemums on the bench one last time. So Margaret knows. I kept our Sunday appointments. Emily clutches the letter, weeping. The following Sunday, the stone bench is empty for the first time. But not bare. A bouquet of white chrysanthemums rests neatly on the seat. Beside it lies a copy of Sunday appointments and a note. Thank you, Mr. Harold, for showing us true love never fades. Dozens of people fill the park that day, reading, talking, or simply sitting. They're no longer strangers. They're witnesses to memory. At the New York event, Emily steps on stage in a simple cream dress. The crowd applauds. The host invites her to speak. She begins. I'm not here as a writer. I'm here as someone who was told the most beautiful love story I've ever known. His name was Harold Owens, a silver-haired man with black coffee and white chrysanthemums. He taught me that love isn't in grand gestures. It's in patient repetition, 40 years of sitting together on a stone bench. This book is. I merely wrote it down. Now I give it to you, who've loved, lost, and remembered. And to those who still believe, a Sunday appointment can last a lifetime. The room falls silent, then erupts in applause and tears. Years later, as a celebrated author, Emily still visits Riverside on Sundays when she can. The old bench now bears a small plaque. Harold and Margaret Owens Bench, a lifetime of love. Emily sits, sometimes silent, sometimes smiling, and occasionally telling a story to the invisible listener beside her. Have you ever had a love you couldn't forget? Share in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories.